2008 is remembered for a lot of reasons. The global financial crisis reaches its climax with the bankruptcy of the Lehman Brothers. The biggest movie franchise in history begins with the release of Iron Man, and Michelle Obama is elected to take away Donut Day from a young, hydrated gaming school. But when historians look back on this year, they'll probably ignore all that stuff and focus on the release of Nicktoons Globs of Doom for the PlayStation 2 and Nintendo Wii. Now, as a historian myself, I know that it's essential to gather primary sources for important research such as this. So as someone who played this game when they were younger and now when they're older, I will document the answer to the following question for these future scholars. Is Nicktoons Globs of Doom good? As per my previous videos, Nicktoons Unite had interesting ideas and a fun story, but was pretty flawed in the gameplay department. Battle for Volcano Island had decent to good gameplay, but a weaker story. And then Nicktoons Attack of the Toybots brought it all together with what I thought was a really fun story and pretty great gameplay, if at a cost of a co-op mode, which had been a staple of the series up until that point. We should also remember that each of the games had been made back-to-back by Blue Tongue Entertainment with only a year's worth of development time for each one. But after Attack of the Toybots, Blue Tongue would stop working on the Nicktoons series and instead begin development on the world-renowned series Blob. Instead, for the final entry in the series, the baton was passed to Incinerator Studios, who is mainly known for assisting development on the Disney's Cars games. And not to get too far ahead of myself, but I do think it was unfortunate for this game to lose the developers who'd already made 3 other games in the series and were really starting to get their footing with the last one. But putting them back on this project would have meant the removal of the Blob from our timeline, and I just don't know if I could bring myself to make that impossible choice. Right away from the back of the box, you get to see another interesting decision, the character roster. Even as a child, I knew this roster sucked. The biggest change here is that Timmy Turner is completely gone, which is a travesty considering he's been a staple from the beginning. Based on my research, it appears to be due to licensing, as Nick doesn't have some of the rights to the series outside of the US. And it's also often cited as why he wasn't in the 2 platform fighters that just came out. But number 1, they worked that out for the other 3 games in the series, so I don't see why they couldn't figure it out for this one too. And number 2, America is the only country in the world that matters anyways. The other big decision that they made is having the villains be playable, which is a cool idea. A cool idea. But in real life, this is horrible. Half of the game's roster are characters no one cares about as a result. Plankton? Okay, sure, he's an icon, but Beautiful Gorgeous? Technus? Who went to their mom and said I need the new Trelloc game for this Christmas? If they had the old syndicate of Calamitous, Vlad, Crocker, and Plankton, okay, sure, that could work. Vlad, Crocker, and Plankton are all iconic, and Calamitous is at least iconic to the Nicktoons series, so I could accept that. But these randos are absolutely terrible. When they interact, it feels like when your middle school teacher used to assign project groups instead of letting the students pick their own, and everyone just wanted to switch back to be with their friends. I mean, these guys do not hang out. If you could trade in the 5 villains for additional heroes, you could have a pretty cool cast. Imagine instead having Timmy, Tommy, Rocco, Jenny, and Ginger instead of these guys. Ginger is a good show, I'm telling you guys. But fine, if I can't have Ginger, then I'm gonna go with Otis the Cow. Imagine Otis the Cow fighting Invader Zim's house. You want this, I know you do. But actually, you don't know what you want, the game knows what you want. So in addition to giving you the junior varsity cast of Nickelodeon characters, it also removes the character selection option at the beginning of each level, like Toybots had. So instead of letting you pick whoever you want to use, it makes you play with whoever it decides is the flavor of the day. Meaning yes, you will have to play as Trelloc. Have fun, kids. Also, before we get too far into this, I have to say, I grew up with the whole Unite series, and over the years I've replayed all of these games countless times. Except this one. I've never returned to this one until now. I hated this game as a kid when it came out, and considering my collection of games that I tolerated as a child, that was quite something. So in addition to asking if the game's worth playing in 2025, we're also going to try to figure out why did I hate it. Well, besides having to play as Technus. But it's not like the first couple games were amazing or anything, so what happened here? Was I just too old by the time that this came out? Well, let's start with the story. Our story begins at the very beginning. And you may say, Hydrated Gaming, that's where all stories of this type begin. I'm not expecting a game called Spongebob SquarePants featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom to begin in media res. But no, my dear viewer, I mean the beginning. Back at the beginning of time, with what is referred to as the Big Sneeze, which apparently created the Nicktoons universe. Also, the Big Sneeze implies the existence of a Big Sneezer. Reddit must hate this game. The sneeze creates the titular Globs of Doom, which is what I'll refer to these things as because I don't want to call them boogers, which is essentially what they are, but I'm a grown man and that just doesn't feel like a word that someone with a 401k is supposed to say. So the globs go flying for what I assume is a millennia, and land in Bikini Bottom where Squidward and SpongeBob are taking a nice walk. Well, at least SpongeBob is. I don't know what Squidward is doing. That is not how he is supposed to move. Wait, I shouldn't need to tell you this. Don't you guys make the cartoons? The globs land on Squidward and turn him into a zombie who immediately starts chasing SpongeBob and Patrick. Jimmy Neutron jumps out through a portal and SpongeBob recognizes him, confirming this is indeed a sequel to the other games. Also confirming this is the fact that Jimmy takes him to the Maw-Goo lair from Volcano Island, which is a fun callback. It's here you meet up with the rest of our cast, and Jimmy explains that he invited the villains here too because all of their worlds are under attack. Also, newcomers to the series Zim and Dib join the squad with no real explanation given. Zim joins the good side while Dib joins the evil side just to oppose Zim, which all feels very in character. I like this. Another thing that I like is that the levels once again take place in the actual cartoon worlds, which really hadn't happened since the first game. Toybots did have levels called Fairy World, Amity Park, and Bikini Bottom, but besides a matching coat of paint, they really didn't have any strong connections to the Nicktoon worlds. So I like the level aesthetics, but unfortunately the level designs are pretty bad, honestly. The game plays mainly as a beat-em-up with platforming elements, similar to the first couple of games. Attack of the Toybots, which remember I think is the strongest game in the series by a pretty wide margin, was the opposite. It was a platformer with beat-em-up elements. And this swap back to a combat focus was a pretty bad idea in my opinion. The combat in all these games has never been more complicated than press one button over and over again until all the enemies are dead. Sure, Unite had some stamina-based special attacks, but mainly it was still mash square to win. The problem is something that simple and repetitive doesn't really work as the central mechanic to build your game around. Unite had the aforementioned power-ups and the interesting simultaneous 4-player system, and Volcano Island had loads of hidden collectibles to find. But Globs of Doom really just has the bare-bones combat. Beat up enemies with one button, go to the next room, and repeat. There are like 2 trophies in each level that unlock fun cheats, and they are pretty fun to find considering they're surprisingly well hidden, even for a seasoned gamer such as myself. But it's not really enough to make these levels engaging. Every character does have one unique special attack, but most just function as a projectile. The goo from Attack of the Toybots was a better mechanic than whatever these things are. And like I said, this is the main problem with switching back to a combat-focused gameplay. There's not an interesting combat toolkit to work with here. These games were only given 1 year of development time, so you're not going to get an extremely in-depth God of War style moveset, especially in a game about multiple characters teaming up. But that's why I think that the platforming of Attack of the Toybots is the superior choice for the series. Now to be fair, it's not like the platforming toolset of Toybots was overly complex. You basically can only run, jump, and roll. But Toybots proved that you can make up for this by designing diverse and varied obstacles to make platforming engaging. And when designing platforming levels, you actually have a lot more options to switch things around by just moving things physically in the game space. That's not to say good platforming design is easy, but I'd imagine that the elements in a platformer are quicker to program. What I mean is that something like a treadmill and some spikes are going to be a lot quicker to make than an advanced enemy AI in a combat-focused game. The trickiest part of making platformer games is knowing where to arrange the obstacles, not how to program them. You see, when it comes to combat, you either need to give the characters fully realized and in-depth movesets, which again doesn't work with this many characters or this game's target audience, or if you have a basic moveset, you need the enemy AI to have complex design, which again takes a lot of time to make, especially if you need multiple enemies. And again, this game only had 1 year of development. So in my opinion, which is thoroughly informed from many years of screwing around in Unity, I might add, the overall design philosophy for this game kinda doomed it from the start. And replaying these levels definitely reminded me of why I never felt the need to go back. They're just made of long, dull, flat, and repetitive environments. They occasionally reference episodes from the shows, sure, but honestly not nearly enough for a game like this. And don't get me wrong, Easter eggs are a way overused trope that people use to mask over the fact that they're completely out of new ideas. Looking at you, Spider-Man. But in a crossover game about cartoon characters, this is where Easter eggs actually belong. This is more or less the point of a game like this. People want to see different characters from different shows interact with all the other worlds and other characters from those different shows. And speaking of interactions, you don't even need to interact with the main gameplay loop either. You can just walk past all these enemies, ignoring the combat entirely. And honestly, that's the most efficient way of dealing with them. Let me repeat, the most efficient way to beat the game is by not interacting with the main gameplay loop. That is not good design. Also, the noises that the enemies make are enough to drive me nuts. Who thought this sounded pleasant?
Wait, what's going on? Whoa!
These noises I still remember from when I was a kid. I wish I could forget them, but they continue to haunt me all these years later. Also, there are a lot of technical problems here, from frame rate issues to sound glitches, and also apparently on the Wii version there's some sort of bug that will nuke your save file if you save in a specific way in the hub world. And I actually remember this happening to me as a kid when I was like mostly through the game. Because I was paranoid about saving in the hub world, I turned off my console after beating one of the levels because it was dinner time, and Mrs. Hydrated Gaming's cooking is to die for. And when I turned it back on to continue playing, I learned that it failed to autosave my progress after the last level that I'd played, meaning I had to redo it, and it was one of the longest levels in the game. Come on. Also, this happened. His body is supposed to be turning to face the direction he's moving in, but I kinda like the way it looks, I don't know why. It's like I'm making him dance. Co-op mode does make a return, which is nice, and it functions about as well as it did in Battle for Volcano Island from what I can tell, but Mrs. Hydrated Gaming didn't feel the need to play more than one level of this game, so we didn't test things very in depth. Also, there's an upgrade system for purchasing stronger attacks and more health, but considering you can ignore the combat and you respawn immediately after death, this feels extremely pointless. After going through 2 standard platforming levels and then an interesting boss fight in each of the cartoon worlds, you face off against what is the final boss of the game. And the gameplay for this final level is completely different than the rest of the game. I mean, I guess this is fine, but it feels completely disconnected. I was always told final levels are supposed to be a test of everything that you learned throughout the game so far, and this definitely isn't that. But to be fair, all I've learned from these levels is how to run away from all my problems, so whatever. And using the power of friendship, SpongeBob teaches the bad guy to love himself and the world, and he redeems himself by fighting the bad guys, and it's a happy ending. I mean, sure, he caused untold amounts of property damages and took over and enslaved the minds of hundreds of thinking, feeling people, but he was sad, so he was the real victim in all this. What a great message. Did this inspire WandaVision, I wonder? Well, at least the bad guy promises to go back and rewrite all of his wrongdoings, implying that this isn't the first time he's taken over a bunch of worlds, but at least he seems sincere in his repentance, and that's good. And thus, with that, the world is saved and the credits roll. As you can no doubt tell, I agree with my childhood self. I don't think the game is very good. I mean, there's not much more to say. When the main gameplay loop is both bad and optional, you're not going to have a very good game on your hands. The story is fun enough, and the cutscenes will probably be entertaining enough to this game's target audience, but it's not enough to carry the gameplay. This game just plays extremely boring, and in my opinion, that's worse than being bad. At least if something's bad, we can point and laugh at it. This just makes you feeling meh. If you're an absolute diehard Nicktoons fan and have played all the other games in the series already, I guess it could be worth experiencing once for the story, especially because you'll never see these guys interacting in depth anywhere else. As it appears, this entry pretty much killed the series. That and the U-Draw tablet was busy killing the publisher. But if you're not a diehard fan of these specific shows, I definitely can't recommend this to you as a game. I was kind of surprised how warmly people seem to feel about this game online, and if that's you, I don't mean to insult something you like. If you like this, I'm happy for you, I don't want to take anything away from that. But both subjectively and objectively, I feel like Toybots is still the way better game. Honestly, I feel like all 3 of the previous games are better. I'm sorry, Globs fans, I just can't consider myself among your ranks. But if you do decide to get this anyways, I guess get it on PlayStation 2 so that you don't have to worry about getting a corrupted save file, which would mean you have to play the game more. And like I said, after this game, that would be it for the Nicktoons series. Kind of a bummer that it died on such a low note, but even though Nickelodeon is done with this concept for now, I still want to look at one last game with you guys. A game that I think told the perfect Nicktoons story, so get excited for what that might be. Who knows, maybe it's Nickelodeon Party Blast, you can't say for certain. You don't know. We here at Hydrated Gaming live to surprise and delight. But at that, I want to thank you for watching Hydrated Gaming, the show where we bully the games you liked when you were 9. Please have a nice rest of your day, and stay hydrated.